right here. Yeah, just gotta press and hold until it turns green.
I know it is. Mix that. Oh, you got it. I used to have lots, so this is the only one left.
All right, the first thing that I want to point out before we get started here is on the registration table out there. Many of you would have saw this and maybe grabbed it. But a real core part of the Grazing Lands Coalition here in North Dakota has to do with how it started, and that was that core group of ranchers back in the mid-90s. And what that evolved into over a number of years was into a mentoring network. And as you go through and consider making changes or have additional questions, especially the conversations that have been stirred up today with our speakers, one of the options that you can utilize is this mentoring network based out of North Dakota. It's North Dakota farmers and ranchers, men and women, who have agreed to be a part of this network and therefore be willing to visit with you or communicate with you, whether it be by phone or email or in person. And so please consider utilizing this. Inside this brochure not only explains a little bit about the Grazing Lands Coalition, but also includes all the contact information for those mentors across the state. So I wanted to make sure and point that out. Now, this afternoon, we'll get started with our next speaker, but so far, or I guess one of the things I wanted to point out was an additional partner that's been a part of this event and really an integral part of helping to coordinate it and organize it, handle registration, a lot of those other details that we just assume are going to be a part of any workshop like this, and that is Clearwater Communications based out of Bismarck. And I just wanted to recognize them for the work that they put in to this to help make this successful. Give them a hand, please, that would be appropriate. One of the other things that they did, one of the many things, is they, ahead of time, when I was asked if I would MC this particular event, is they handed me or sent me a script. Which I very much appreciate. Now, generally when I speak, a script is not usually a part of what I utilize, but I've been pretty much a rule follower up to this point in the day. But because I know Steve as well as I've gotten to know him over the past 3 years, I'm going to put the script away for a little bit. That's all right. One of the things that I think Steve does, one of the many things that I think he does well, is he tells a good story. So I'm going to tell a story about Steve, just real quickly. You're a bit nervous, and now you're maybe even more nervous, aren't you? You see, I first met Steve, this would have been, I believe it was January of 2012, at the Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society conference. I think it was in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And the only reason I actually remember that date is because our daughter was only born about a month and a half before that, and she was actually along at that conference, so it was a new experience for us. But Steve had a booth there, and I believe Gerald Fry actually spoke at that event. And so I walked up to that booth and I asked Steve a question, and I believe it was about mineral for beef cattle. And lo and behold, we went down this rabbit trail and that rabbit trail, and pretty soon we were talking about milk cows. And I wasn't quite sure how we got to that point, or why we were talking about milk cows. It had nothing to do with the question that I asked, but we were there, finished up our conversation, and I didn't really think much of it. But then, a couple years later, I run into Steve at the National Grazing Lands Coalition event, I believe it was in Grapevine, Texas, and asked him a question about development of bull calves. And we went this way and we went that way, and pretty soon, guess what we were talking about? Milk cows. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure if this is coincidence or if this guy's just really crazy about milk cows. And so, keep running into Steve. I ran into him then more recently at the Grass-Fed Exchange. This was in Georgia, maybe about either a few months or maybe about a year later. I had a question about apple cider vinegar. Guess what we talked about? It's more than a coincidence at this point. But here's what I've learned in the process about one of the unique abilities that I believe Steve has. And he referenced this morning, and he even talked about the book, The Milch Cow, is that he has the ability to take reference material that is quite dated, if you will, meaning that it goes back decades, maybe even centuries, and is able to take information from there, observational things that I certainly wasn't aware of, and I think you could maybe go back even a generation or two and some of those observations have been lost. But Steve has the ability to grab a hold of those, make them relevant today, and then help teach people how to look for those particular things. And that's one thing, Steve, that I really appreciate about your ability, and I think we got just a taste of it this morning. But being as well-rounded as you now have the ability to tie this into health of the entire soil, plant, animal, human complex. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say on that topic. So please, welcome, Steve.
Thank you. This is the only slide that will be about food. Everything else will be about milk cows. I got to this point different than Peter did. 20 years ago, January 26th, I broke my right ankle really bad in a horse accident. 6.5 months in an external fixator. Doctor said, you're going to have to find a different job. You'll need a desk job. You won't be able to walk around and do all that. And, I was beginning to believe him after about 2.5 years. If my winters were, I'd work 5, 6, maybe 7 hours down in my shop, cold, cement floored, until I absolutely couldn't stand the pain in my ankle anymore. And then I would go back to the house, put my feet up in a recliner, read a book, eat dinner, watch TV, whatever it might be. This is 5 or 6 out of every 7 days for 150 days in a row. And I saw no end in sight, and I'm beginning to believe that doctor. Who in the room remembers where they were on when Kennedy was shot? It was on the 4th grade playground. Who remembers where you were when the first space shuttle blew up? I was talking to Derry MacArthur from Boise Kenworth Truck Parts, and I go, Derry, I gotta go, the space shuttle blew up. Who remembers where they were on 9/11? I should see every hand here. Well, I was sitting on Finian at Tana Kirby's up on Uncle Daryl's ship cabin. Who remembers where they were at 10:30 in the morning, December 12th, 2002? Nobody. But my world changed that day because I went in to see a different kind of a doctor. He was a chiropractor, a certified applied kinesiologist, and an expert in food. Exhaustive survey I had to fill out before I went in, and then some other things. He said, quit eating this, start eating this. I went home and I threw that away and I bought this stuff. From that day, I didn't have 10 more of those days that winter, and for about 15 years they stayed away until the cartilage was completely gone. One of the early doctors said, you're going to have to get an ankle replacement, but wait as long as you can because they're not getting worse every year. Anyway, I got one a year ago. So I'm pretty happy about that, but that's what got me focused on human health. I was already doing grass-finished beef. I just added that to the cattle side of things, the soil side of things. So that's what drives me, and I've asked Peter to jump in when I go off of the a lot more knowledgeable rails that Peter's got. This is the farmer's explanation of what I think's going on. I mean, and everybody in this room, if you had been through this, you would get this too. We all come kind of from the same mentality, I think. Anyway, so look, has the battery run out of this thing too? I guess it has. Maybe it's not turned on somewhere.
That was my fault.
Okay, so too low of minerals, hyperthyroid. as our iodine level goes lower, pretty quick, iodine or iodide gets too low and we get one of these diseases. The doctor wants you, well, a lot of them just want to take your thyroid out, but if you add iodine back, the form you need, and Lugol solution, the balance, at some point your iodine level gets high enough and the need for that individual one goes away. And then you saw the miner's canary thing with the 2 Kentucky coal miners, but all of these celiac, gluten, lactose, those are our miner's canaries. Those people are telling us, hey, there's a problem with the way dairy or wheat or whatever it might be is being raised in general in this country. And then for me, that's a great big one. So I was listening to a talk by Dr. Zach Bush. Anybody in here familiar? I'm happy to share, but we're looking at 75 through 2009, and you can see how it's going up, and it's going up faster and faster each year. This is celiac and how much glyphosate we were using, and you can see that line going up. By 2035, you can see where each of these diseases is going to go to with some pretty good number crunchers. In Vietnam, they downsized the bore of the M16 because with a smaller bullet, they didn't kill anybody, they injured them. Well, that took 2 people off of the battlefield instead of just 1. Well, we're working with that same thing here. We've got all of these children that are getting these diseases, and it takes more people out of the workforce doing other productive things. Not that taking care of these kids is not important, but we've got to take a certain percentage of the people that are productive to do this. Then we've got adults with all of the diseases, and more of them and earlier in life, so we need to drag more people out of the productive workforce to take care of that. And not only are we having a after you get sick care crisis, I hate using the word health care because it's actually the after you get sick care. It's going to lead to a financial problem as well as a after you get sick care problem. That's what I just said, I guess. So March 11th, 2011, I guess I must like dates. Fukushima went off because of this tsunami, and the cloud that first went around the world, it went from a strip from Boise to Philadelphia, and human miscarriages along that line doubled from the cesium falling out of the cloud. Okay? Lots of stories about things that happened with cattle then as well. There were a number of miscarriages, that's the wrong way to say it. There were a number of pregnancies that went full term that maybe should not have, and we're going to be seeing those diseases come up in the future because of that excess cesium that was around there. I drew this line in here. I don't know that I actually got the Mississippi that runs up and goes to over New England because of this book that was written, I think it was sometime in the 70s or early 80s. Basically, the people in New England were getting the same diseases and almost exactly the same percent of population as the factory workers in the lower Mississippi. That lead rain, mercury rain, cadmium rain, whatever it might be, it was going up out of those stacks and raining down on New England. Epigenetics, I guess that's all I want to say about that last deal. I've heard 90-10, 10% genetics, 90% epigenetics, how they get expressed. I think Zach Bush in his talk said 94-6, not his book, his talk. So in right around 70, we had this trifecta of things that happened. The Great Society, the food pyramid first started, high fructose corn syrup. Why did it kind of take off then? In 73, Russian crops failed. We sold all this grain to Russia, Earl Butts, fence row to fence row. We were going to make a killing in grains. Well, the next year the Russians did not have that failure, so we did not sell that much grain. And we're sitting on this pile of stuff. What are we going to do with it? Somebody goes, hey, we figured out how to make a sugar substitute, high fructose corn syrup. Since then, I mean, if you see that line go up, and I think you used the number earlier, the amount of high fructose corn syrup in our diet has gone up 700%. The amount of type 2 diabetes has gone up 700%. Different things that happened, but if we hadn't had this trifecta, where would our consumer price index, I mean, that's where it would have kind of been headed if we hadn't have. I think it's an evil plot, but you know, maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist. We've created this problem, and I call it after you get sick here. Gabe Brown, Elaine, Soil Food Web, Maynard Murray, this adaptive grazing, that's Alan Williams. He's coined that term. The more of the stuff you do, the faster we can get the soil back. Does everybody know what I mean by Elaine Ingham or Maynard Murray? I don't think I have to ask about Gabe Brown. Elaine Ingham's the biology in the soil. Maynard Murray was all about the minerals in the soil. Okay? Uh-oh, I did that thing again. So if we want to clean up our environment, if we want to clean up the water on the kitchen floor and we're just sitting there wringing out towels, we'll never get the job done until we go outside and turn off the garden hose that's running the water on the kitchen floor. No cancer. The book was written in '76. He was a New England country doctor that was seeing in his elderly patients those who had predominantly eaten ocean-based protein had fewer aches, pains, diseases than those who were eating land-based protein. So over the course of 20 years, and he wrote his book after he figured it out, so this is starting in the early 50s is when he's first seeing this. Over the course of 20 years, he was able to recreate that immunity to disease in both plants and animals. So in the early 50s, out through the 60s, no cancer. That's right out of the book. Oops. Vanna? In 2002, I mean, we're only talking 30 years, 35 years. You know, we've polluted the environment enough in 35 years that we've got whales dying at the same rate we're dying in that environment that he thought was going to be the savior of the planet. He was bringing back to the land. So we spend all this on health care, but I call it after you get sick care. Now, you break your ankle. Hey, I'm glad we have those guys that do that, but basically we're going to have to prevent all this other stuff. Acute versus chronic, okay? Popeye's girlfriend's name was olive oil, you know? I mean, even our cartoons used to be healthy. This is averages. I typed it because you couldn't read it. Calcium, magnesium, and iron, cabbage, lettuce, tomatoes, and spinach, and how it went down. In World War I, we were still eating really close to home. And in Weston A. Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, 70% of the men from the Southeast, white men had been there a long time, continually clearing new land to plant cotton and tobacco because the minerals were playing out. A lot of rain. Minerals weren't there. 7 out of 10 that went to the draft board were rejected. The upper Midwest, where we're standing today, 7 out of 10 were accepted. So the mineral content of the soil, forget the toxins, and well, there were some, but nothing like we've got now. I find that pretty amazing. So you can see what happens with the minerals. Once we started using a tractor, we weren't doing what God said we were supposed to be doing for us to nourish ourselves. You can see how each phase that we added on reduced the minerals more and more and more in what we were eating. We aren't nourishing ourselves. We eat and eat and eat trying to get that protein, but if we're eating the wrong thing, we just get bigger and bigger and bigger because we don't get that protein that you talked about. So, you know, you look at some of these, as the minerals went down, look what happened to the number of people that we put into prison. And remember the trifecta where it happened? And how many went to prison? Well, this lady was a parole officer back in the early 90s. She wrote this book. At that time, 4 out of 5 people that got out of prison were back in prison within 5 years. Of her parolees that she could get to change their diet, 4 out of 5 were still out of prison 5 years later. So it affects how we behave. We eat to get vitamins, minerals, and enzymes, and conventional ag produces tons, pounds, and bushels. They don't, we're not getting what we need. We're rewarding the wrong thing. Who in here has heard of Weston Price, read the book? Okay, just a few. He went around, he was a dentist from Cincinnati, and he was seeing all this facial deformity and cavities, and he thought it must be something in what we're eating. Went around, found these 15 groups of people that were still eating in the old way. Nothing modern, Western, processed in their diet. It was how they grew and prepared their food. Some of these groups were getting 30% fat. That was the minimum back then in the 30s. Some 80, Eskimos, polar bears. All perfect health. The common denominator in the 1930s between these 15 groups, they were all getting 5 to 10 times the amount of vitamins and minerals the average American was getting, and the average American doesn't get half of that today. Peter, what would your guess be on vitamins and minerals today versus 1935?
Well, how do you factor in supplementation?
Well, okay.
How do you factor in fortification?
Okay.
And so it's a competing hypothesis.
What he said. Wrong expression of the right gene because the wrong minerals were present. We needed iodine, and we had one of the other 3 of the halide group, bromine, chlorine, or fluorine. We didn't have enough iodine to excrete these and use this today. So NPK, similar to corn, wheat, and soy for humans, you know, you got a number of things that happen in both the land, the soil, we're turning that soil to dirt, and this is why we're doing this, because Big Ag wants their paycheck. Lights are on and nobody's home here. Type 3 diabetes, I'd heard that before today, but thank you again for bringing it up. Well, similarly, hyperstimulate the immune system, and then there's no way to get it out of the brain. Aluminum. Best natural detoxifier of aluminum is cilantro. Best natural detoxifier of mercury is parsley. So I just did this kind of the NPK version of us. In 2017, 100% of the corn in Saskatchewan was sprayed with Roundup to burn it down, dry it down. There's another little nice synchronized drying of the crops is going to come up a little bit later. So our pH goes down, and then we get these different diseases. And when I was a kid, there was a disease called sugar diabetes, but we must have cured that because nobody calls it sugar diabetes anymore. You know, if you've got type 1 diabetes, your parents or your grandparents ate too much sugar. If you get type 2 diabetes, you ate too much sugar. We need to own up to what's going on here. I don't want to have a band-aid. I want to cure. I want to prevent. Okay, get back to the basics. This one I find interesting because you look at these different minerals here and the different things that they're a deficiency. These diseases are a deficiency of these minerals, all right? So then along comes glyphosate, which ties up, chelates, immobilizes the same minerals. And notice we've got this asthma as a magnesium deficiency. Look at how much that's increased, and that was just to 11. I mean, we're 8 years past that now, but a deficiency in magnesium causes asthma. Kind of said all that. You know, back in the day, marrow and fat were kind of a big thing. There was nothing that tasted better, was more nourishing. My favorite story from Weston Price, he's in Peru at about 12,000 feet in this village, and he's been there for 10 days, 2 weeks, and all of a sudden there's this commotion, and it's like, well, what's going on? And somebody said, well, such and such a grandma is coming home. Well, where's she been? Down to the ocean. What was she doing? Catching fish and drying the eggs. Why was she doing that? So that her granddaughters could have perfect babies. Of course, these two things weren't invented yet. She didn't want a Lexus or an HD TV. She only wanted to have a child that didn't have autism and celiac and Crohn's and gluten intolerance and. We've kind of lost our rudder, I think. So here we are back to the stave. Okay, a fellow I called lives in Nebraska, and I called him a year ago, January 17th. That's tomorrow. And I said, hey, what's going on? Somebody that, Steve Swerzik, not a secret. We talk every once in a while. What's new on your end? What's new on your end? And he goes, well, we weaned 750 calves on December the 17th. On Christmas Day, we got a 2-inch freezing rain. I'm telling my vet friend from Simplot's feedlot there in Idaho, and he goes, oh man, I hear the wreck coming. And I go, hang on, Dick. As of the 17th of January 2018, 30 days later, he hadn't had one sick calf. What was he feeding? His own chopped corn, it was non-GMO, and prairie hay mixed together, and 10 ounces of Kansas gray sea salt, Independent Salt Company, Kannapolis, Kansas. That was about 7 or 8 times what that calf would have normally ingested. We're right back to those groups, those 15 groups that Weston Price found. Nobody got sick at the most stressful time of a calf's life, because they got all the minerals. I don't know about the vitamins, but they got all the minerals that their body needed, and they just excreted the excess. I was at a place in western Wyoming here 3 or 4 springs ago, and the last thing that we did is we went to this old 160-year ranch, and the last thing we did there was we looked through the greenhouses and in the gardens. The first garden we're in, I'm like from here to the wall with a couple of other people that were putting the thing on there, talking over there, and I'm like, I'm seeing this, and I'm like, man, look at all the holes in the leaves. The bugs are having a heyday. So we walk about 75 yards, and we wind up maybe from here to that corner away. Here's the same plants in another garden plot, and there's hardly a hole in the plant. And she finishes talking, I raised my hand, I said, so what's the difference between where the first garden plot you showed us and this one? She goes, that was the original garden plot. They'd been pulling minerals out of that soil for 160 years. This was a pasture up until last year. Nutrient cycling. I thought it was interesting, but okay. Halide group, I kind of talked about this before. Other than iodine prevents, chlorine causes more cancer than any other mineral. Another one, the selenium, the first thing that selenium is going to do in the body is detoxify lead, mercury, and cadmium. And if you've got enough left over for bodily functions, super. On a cow's best day, she can convert 16% of the sodium selenite, the steel mill byproduct most people put into a mineral mix and call it selenium. It is a form. And she has to do a little work to do it. It has to be converted to selenomethionine. Selenium yeast is about 90% bioavailable. So, pardon my numbers, but it makes the math easy. If you're feeding 100 sodium selenite, the cow gets 16 and she has to do a little work. If you're feeding 20 of the selenomethionine, the yeast, she gets 18 because it's 90% bioavailable and she doesn't have to do any work. People say, I can't afford that because it's 5 times as much. The other thing about it is she can't get too much unless you just opened a bag there. As long as it's in some kind of a mix, the selenomethionine will just go out the back end. You can feed too much sodium selenite. Pretty interesting, the borax conspiracy. You can get that online, another story. So I was kind of equating what happened with Weston Price on the left, the perfect dental arch. Who in here remembers the movie To Kill a Mockingbird? When the black fellow smiles, that is like a poster child for Weston Price. I've never seen a bigger set of teeth in my life. I don't know what that guy ate when he grew up, but he ate the right thing. Anyway, I was kind of relating the heart girth and probably the tail process, I'm beginning to believe. And again, this little girl, she's got that copper bump right there. Goes just that little bump right in there. So the kind of animal that'll finish on grass, that's pretty deep. Most people could start out with a bull like that, but at some point that deep of a bull will get you in trouble if your cows are getting pretty deep. We can talk about that later. And then the kind of forage that will finish an animal. You know, the only thing I guess you can do is move more often or less often if your paddocks are of a certain size. That's why I kind of like them. Putting fence up and taking fence down. Back to that again. This SR65 is a mix of Redmond's conditioner, the detoxifying clay that I'll get into, and sea salt. And I met some people in, I'm going to use the room. They were doing 2,500 acres of alfalfa. They wanted to get off the treadmill, and so I talked them into taking a pivot, and on this half they put the SR65. Sorry, I just made nothing about this side, but there's more over here. Anyway, on this side they put the SR65, close to home, $17.50 an acre. On this side they put a $110 an acre, 3-year long, supposed to last 3 years, commercial fertilizer. About a month later, they took the first cutting off, and there was 1,000 pounds to the acre more alfalfa on this side. They took the backpack off, the toxin pack off of the alfalfa it could grow. There wasn't enough time for the minerals to get in there really, or not in any great amount. At the end of the first year, they're a ton ahead. They reapply the SR65 and some chicken compost. Nothing over here, that was 3 years. they gained 1.8 more tons the second year, and then the third year they did nothing and they gained another ton yet. So it was 3.8 tons for about half or 2/3 of the cost of the commercial fertilizer. Beginning of the second year, they quit all commercial fertilizer on 2,500 acres and went to SR65 and this chicken compost deal for the nitrogen. Anyway, then another guy, Michael Davis in New Mexico, we called up and he had some, how much time we got? I kind of tell too many stories.
At least 20 minutes.
Okay. Anyway, he put about $25 worth of sea salt, foliar, and cattle that have been slowing down to gaining a pound a day over the course of the next 8 weeks in the middle of the summer, July and August. In New Mexico, they gained over 3 pounds a day for 25 bucks. It's a 62-acre plot. Okay, everybody here knows this. She found that for every dollar you spend on supplements, why do we need the supplements? Because those things are no longer in our food, but thinking people go, hey, I gotta have that vitamin K2 for my bones or whatever. You save $40 over the rest of your life on pharmaceuticals. You know, we can spend a lot more on food and life cycle costs, be spending less for our not to get sick care. So Elaine Ingham, top right, so a food rep, somebody like that in the top left come running after me, it would change the way I was thinking. That's why I put it up there. I mean, we're living in our air-conditioned house, driving our air-conditioned car to our air-conditioned office, and we got sick. Unless we kind of get out of that paradigm, what makes us think we're going to get healthy if we're just taking a pill? He's going to get you out of that paradigm, and then, you know, there's just a bunch of food in what looks like a gel cap. Interesting. How many billions have we spent on trying to find the cure for cancer? What do they use to find where cancer is in the body? The thing that causes cancer? Sugar. So this is the way I look at it, is the cholesterol, the statin drug is like somebody's down whatever the street is running in here and saying, hey, you can only send one fire truck. I don't care how big that building is or how bad the fire is, you can only send one fire truck. Versus if you don't eat those inflammatory foods, foods that are causing the inflammation in the body, or behaviors that are causing inflammation, or age. As joints wear out, there's more pain in joints. That's what happened with my ankle. When I got rid of the inflammatory foods, my pain went away, and I didn't need anything else to take care of it. Diatomaceous earth is 50 to 75. It actually goes out in the body and seeks out omega-6s, surrounds them and takes them out of the body. An inflammatory food, omega-6s. Peter, if I'm saying something here and you got something to add, please, because so we got to stop eating the bread. Brominated wheat flour. Why is the flour brominated now? In 1980, there was enough iodine in 2 slices for the RDA, which was just enough so we didn't get a goiter. Okay? Wasn't enough to make us healthy. Well, we had the big iodine scare, and so they changed out the iodine and used bromine. So I Google it, and why was it in there? Who in here has either made or eaten homemade bread? Before 1980, who in here has eaten or made homemade bread? Okay, every single loaf Mom made. I tried one loaf and threw it away. Every single loaf, there's a great big air bubble just under the top crust. They were adding the iodine to get uniform air bubbles throughout the loaf. That was the goal. It wasn't that they had our interest at heart, our health at heart, when they were using iodine. It was just like, oh, this will work. Well, when iodine was taken away from them, oh, well, bromine, it's in the same deal with it. So now we've got brominated flour that was sprayed with Roundup. Why can't you go to Europe and eat bread and it doesn't bother you at all, but you can't eat the bread in the U.S.? The bottom one there, they were trying to figure out how much lead, mercury, cadmium. I guess I picked on those three because that's just what I'm used to saying. We could have in our diet or environment and not look sick. Not necessarily be healthy, but just not look sick. So they take 100 rats, feed them this much lead, and one rat dies. An LD1, a lethal dose for one rat. Same thing, mercury, same thing. Somebody says, hey, what happens if we put 2 of these in there? So they take a new batch of rats, an LD1 of lead, LD1 of mercury, they're all dead. When they back the mercury down to, they had to get to below 1/20th of a LD1 of mercury added to an LD1 of lead before they had less than 100 rats dead. And we've added how many different trademark unique substances? How much time do we have?
Still good, 15.
Nah, I'm too far from the end. Who all in here has seen this video? It's 3 minutes long. Do you think it's 3 minutes?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm only going to play the first half, but if you notice in this corner is the date of the year. And watch what happens about the 1st of April. And it isn't that we all decided to start driving every car we own for 24 hours a day for the next 45 days. Where's the little... And now I said I was going to play it and it won't come up. I don't get it. Well, okay, go online. Oh, I see it now. It wasn't showing. Sorry.
I'll see if I can find it quick.
If it won't come up, usually it shows up over here, Josh, when you click. But hey, if it won't come up, it won't come up. It's all right. Go online, YouTube, and this will come up. It's amazing when we start stirring dirt how much carbon we're throwing in the atmosphere. Well, we're also throwing all of those pesticides and herbicides that was on that ground into the air at the same time. Seriously. Go home and watch this video. It's only 3 minutes out of your life. Just as safe. Synchronize the drying of the crops. Look at all these non-GMO crops that we're spraying. And you notice I've got garbanzo in all capital letters. It takes more Roundup to dry garbanzos than anything else. If you like hummus, you should be eating organic hummus. Okay? Post-tillage stress disorder. Pasteur versus pasture. Pasteur versus pasture. Beauchamp and Pasteur in France. They're butting heads their whole life. Pasteur on his deathbed said, I was wrong, he was right. It's not the bug, it's the terrain. Okay? So how do we, that was kind of the mineral side of the thing. How do we protect ourselves from all of these toxins that are blowing in? You remember the Fukushima thing at the beginning? We have to shut off that garden hose. We can't, this is important, but I'm averse to passing a law. The only law I've been in favor of for 40 years, if you want to pass a law, you've got to get 2 off the books first. I'm still only in favor of that law, but temptations and impulsive behavior. We got people going into schools. We got the guy in Las Vegas up on the 23rd floor with a machine gun. Pretty crazy. Dirty Dozen, who in here has heard of this? Every year they take the 45 most consumed fruits and vegetables, and then they find the 12 that have had the most herbicides and pesticides sprayed on them. And they call those the Dirty Dozen. They say if you only eat those 12 as organic, I know, we shouldn't be eating vegetables, it should just be all, okay. Anyway, if you would only eat those as organic, you would eliminate 75 to 80% of the pesticides and herbicides you would normally ingest, eating the top 45 eaten fruits and vegetables. This thing here across the bottom, the negative eating, that was what the doctor said to eliminate out of my diet. Again, turning off that garden hose. You saw this, an ounce of prevention. I mean, it's pretty interesting, the conditioner deal there. In the book there that Redmond puts out, we eat clay and wear it too, and there are other clays. I live close to Redmond, that's the product that I use. There's a lady about 75, she takes about that much, my thumb, clay, puts it in a Rubbermaid tub with hot water with the intention of pulling toxins out of her feet. Well, in the 20 minutes it took for the water to cool off, she must have forgotten why she had her feet in this tub. Being frugal, she didn't want to throw it away, so she watered her houseplants and killed every plant in her house. She pulled so many toxins out of her feet in 15 minutes time. So I told you the SR65 story for the guys with the alfalfa, with the 4 ounces a day with the cow. So you remember that picture from earlier. About the 4th year I was working with these people in New York. They put the conditioner out there, but they wouldn't entice the cows. If you can't figure out a way to get them to eat it, it doesn't do any good to just put it out, because we've dirtied our environment up so much, they won't eat enough. Now I say that, in 19 out of 20 places, they won't eat enough unless you add some, and I'm going to say sugar. Whoa, I just said don't eat sugar, now you want to feed it to the cows. Steve Swerzik said it's too hard to find other things that aren't tainted themselves. And a guy called me up about 4 years ago, right about now, and he had some registered low-lying heifers with hoof and ankle problems. We talked about minerals and stuff for a while, and finally I said, are you feeding any GMOs? Oh yeah, corn stalks last fall, Roundup Ready alfalfa. I couldn't talk him out of the alfalfa. I said, you got to feed 6 ounces a day until a month after the alfalfa is gone. That was going to be 3.5 months later. He called me up in 3 weeks and said the symptoms are all gone. God gave us the antidote to glyphosate or Roundup. This clay pulled conditioner pulled the Roundup out of those cattle faster than they could eat it. And then the happy lines thing, he'd never had any happy lines until I told him in their deal they were feeding it on, sorry, I forgot where I was. They were feeding baleage, so I just had him, there's 70 cows in there, put 280 ounces of conditioner on top, and go back about 2.5 months later, and half his herd had happy lines, and he had never had one animal before. So here we are. This is about 1/3 of the center fold out of that book, We Eat Clay and Wear It Too. You can go online and download that. It's easy to find. I added the word sugar in front of diabetes there. So my friend down in Arizona, he's got all of his kids soaking their feet to get it done. Okay, there's a book list coming up here right away, and it doesn't take long to go through that, but the best layperson's book on epigenetics is Pottinger's Prophecy. It's coming up. In the book Epigenetic Revolution, I found Waddington's epigenetic landscape. We put our cows inside this fence. They're not like the buffalo. If it's not inside that fence, they don't have access to it. And if you'll notice, on the left, the ball's going to roll down to the left if we don't do anything. If we do the right thing, it'll go to the right. And the earlier in life, crops or cattle, we do the right thing, the better outcome we have. So we've got a decision point here, and that is mineral-rich, toxin-free interuterine environment. I was 15 miles off the east end of Lake Erie, and this fellow, 1 or 2 of his coming yearling calves were almost yearling calves, were good enough to keep for heifers. in his almost 2 years old, 2 or 3, and then in his 3 years old, he had 13 or 14 that were just really nice. And so mineral change, bull change, what's going on? And nothing funny. I said, well, did you have a really warm or a cold winter? Oh yeah, we had a bad winter here a few years ago. I go, well, when was it? So we got the phone out, we figured it out. It was the winter those calves were in utero. His normal winter was it'd snow 6 or 12 inches and melt and they're in mud. 6 or 12 inches and melt and they're in mud. I mean, and this just went on along. That year, it snowed in the fall and it stayed 10, 12 degrees colder than normal. The cattle, even though it was colder, they were just on a snowpack all winter long. And those calves turned out dramatically better because we reduced the stress. So then when do we wean? I talked about the 10-month thing. Kelly's deal there, I think I already told you about that. Back in 1950, we're kind of talking about the same kind of thing. Genome Project. Anyway, now we're in the list of books. I'm almost to the end. This is the best layperson's book, 90% environment. Who in here has read Pottinger's Cats? Jed?
I have not read Pottinger's Cats.
You're the only one in here that...
Could you give us a quick definition of epigenetics?
The air, the water, the feed, the handling. Talk about stress. You're going to put up electric fence and graze the center strip of the road out there by the scale house. You know, the freeway. I mean, you know, the cattle can never relax. But yeah, it's everything. Well, and then it'd be the interuterine environment of that cow as well when that calf was in there. And of course, what she's getting is going to affect what the calf's getting. We've already talked about this. Now, Mary Enig wrote in '99, I believe, The Oiling of America. It was the very first article I ever read on the Weston A. Price website, and I was hooked. She is quoted very heavily in Nina's book here. Vitamin K2, we either eat or supplement calcium and magnesium. But they get a little confused. They don't know where to go in the body, and the older we get, the more confused they get, and the more we have osteoporosis and hardening of the arteries. Vitamin K2, in balance with D3 and vitamin A, in her book shows she takes the calcium out of the arteries and puts it back in the bones. Best first book on a subject that I think I've ever read was this one right here. Pharmacology, the biology in the soil, the biology in our gut, microbiome. I think that's been said today. This guy is amazing. How much time have we got to tell this story? Yeah. Okay. A friend came, and his wife had been kind of standoffish, and I didn't know what was going on. And Lynn comes in the house. And how's Julie? Well, early onset dementia. Oh man, I just quit everything else we were doing. I gave him my copy of the book. I gave him some iodine, some selenium, some two other things that I had there, coconut oil and can't remember, and sent him home. He said, he called me up in a couple of weeks, man, I bought 4 copies, sent it to everybody in the family. He called me up 9 months later. This is not the only time we're talking, but 9 months after he and I had first talked, he calls up and I go, hey Lynn, what's going on? And he goes, well, I got some good news. And I go, well, what's that? And he said, when this started 3 years ago, we went into the neurologist, and one of the tests that they did was have her count backwards from 100. It was a test for dementia, and she couldn't. But this morning she could. That's a good book. Courtney Griffin's Epigenetics, Google that. That's the best laypersons. It's a little hard to, there's some real gems in there. It's about 15 minutes long. Iodine, David Brownstein, he had stopped at 200 milligrams of iodine for a human being. He said, I've only lost 5 or 6 women to breast cancer. He said, if I knew then what I know now, I think I'd have gone to 300 milligrams. That's a lot of iodine for a human being. 1 in 1,000 people will have a real adverse reaction. In the summertime, I do 2 droppers full in a quart of water, which is somewhere between 110 and 120 milligrams of iodine, and the mosquitoes don't bite me when I'm out irrigating. Jerry Bernetti, he had to learn this to stay alive. Made him a great student. He came up with a lot of things. Water, clean, there's some other things to it, but now here's a good book. You guys probably all know about it, but we're turning this soil into dirt all the way across the country, and now Gabe's got that book that's going to turn that dirt back into soil, and I kind of like that. I think it's right there. And everybody pretty much knows that. Okay, Zach Bush. I'm about done. Regenerator. I think the first time I heard regenerate rather than sustain was from Gabe Brown. Must have been about 14, 15 years ago. Doug Flack said, we thought about having this as the tagline for our farm. But so this was kind of the deal. The more of your diet that's raw, you don't get scurvy. The more of your diet that's raw, the less cancer. The more that's cooked, the more cancer. Clean. So we talked about the conditioner of the clay. Unprocessed. Omega-6s was a big one to get rid of when my pain went away. Fermented foods, heat, moisture, slight acidity, warmth, and time gives you all these probiotic-rich foods. Dr. Robert Lustig, University of California, San Francisco Medical Center. Really Google that guy. He really nails it on sugar. Nutrient-rich. Maynard Murray, the sea salt deal. Fiber, okay, so maybe, and then intermittent fasting. But 2 weeks. It doesn't take a whole long time to change these things, a couple weeks. And then there's just the amount of sugar that is in those different things that's missing from that one on the left. Anyway, we're trying to get the right things in there and the bad things out. So I'm standing at the farmer's market and I give away these little baggies of the clay and the sea salt. And there's a couple there, and I am finished after this comment. There's a couple standing there with a 11, 12-year-old daughter who's being pretty nice, seen and not heard, but she really wants to be down there at the trinkets. And I kind of got all through, you know, I'd spent 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes talking about we need more minerals and fewer toxins. So I grabbed a bag of each. I got the sea salt in my right hand and the clay in my left hand, and I go, well, it's the hokey pokey mineral program. You put the good stuff in, you pull the bad stuff out. 5 minutes later, I look down by the trinkets, and she's looking back at me, laughing behind her hand. Anyway, if there is time for a question, I'm happy to answer anything. Or if we're done, I'm happy to stop.
We can take a question.
A question? Yes, sir.
You're always talking about soil or sea salt.
Sea salt.
Is there something that happened to Redmond salt? You never mentioned that anymore.
No, we're closer to the Kansas gray, so at home when I'm out there, Redmond, Kansas gray, a sea salt, Himalayan salt, that's expensive. C90, that's what Maynard Murray started with, then it went Don Jensen and then Bob Kane, who has it now. Yeah.
I just thought maybe there was...
Nope. The SR65, that was the Redmond product that they used there in Idaho, but we're close, so yeah. Okay, well, thanks.
Okay, let's give Steve a hand.
I don't know that we recorded it.